Okay. All right, good. Okay, so about to be stopped out of our dollar trade here. We did take just to recap some of the trades from this morning. This is the dollar index. Excuse me, I'm just going to do a quick recap of some trades that we took from this morning. And I wanted to show the dollar index trade here. If you recall from pre-market, before the market opened, we had an analysis that showed that we were long. The dollar was bullish and heading up. And so we took a trade here off of what we call a yellow bar probe retracement. Notice we came up, we hit this resistance level twice. Boom, boom, 4/8 pivot. Pulled back, found support in what we call a yellow bar probe trade retracement. And then we had what we call a resumption of buying in here, where we entered long. Our initial stop, if you recall, was just under here. And then notice that you had this little pocket of candles here where we showed that you could have had a little tighter stop that would have taken you out somewhere in here. Remember, we had drawn this little shelf area right in here. This would have been a tighter stop, and you would have exited possibly this trade just under 60. Just under 60. See it? Now, we left the stop a little looser just under the stealth line here. In fact, it might actually take us out. Watching it. Nope. Okay, the trade's done. There you go. Trade's done. Took us out. All right, now you got to remember to take your sell target off there. And it never did reach this pivot. This was our target right here. An exiting technique that works really well sometimes is a reversal around a pivot, in which case the market would come up, break a pivot by a few ticks, and reverse through it, and you would have your stop just very close underneath the pivot to exit. That's another good exiting technique. Let's look over here at another chart. That was the dollar. Let's look at the EMD trade. Correspondingly, since we had a breakout of the dollar, we've noticed a corresponding relationship of 6E, which is the euro futures, to the equity markets. In other words, they correlate to each other pretty strongly now, and the dollar tends to head the other direction. So what we're saying is that when the dollar, at least for now, when the dollar is heading up, we're looking to buy the dollar, short 6E, which is the euro futures, and correspondingly short the equity markets. Now the trades on the equity market were as follows. On EMD, we had a yellow bar probe trade shortly after the open, 6:31 Pacific. This was right after the open. You had a yellow bar probe, rolled over, and broke support. Then we went, if you recall, on the equities into a little consolidation patch between the pivots, like such. Remember we had a little confusion on what direction the market was going to go in the first, say, 15, 20, 30 minutes of trading. We had a little bit of confusion. We were not certain what the direction was going to be. And more specifically, what I'm saying is that in here, as this was chopping around this resistance area here, this could have constituted a trend change to the upside, in which case it would have broken up, hit resistance, pulled back, and then continued on a move up, and we would have traded the long side of that market. It didn't do that. It rolled over, and if you recall, we shorted EMD. I believe we got filled. I have to go back and look on a break of the support level right here. Remember we had the sell order right under there? And the reason we put it there was because this was a clearly identified support area underneath a pivot. And so in order for a resumption of selling for me personally to be confirmed, I needed to see a break of support in here, which filled us short. Now, you came down and you hit this pivot, and you had a little bit of reversing action here. Notice it came down and bounced, came down and bounced, and reversed through the pivot. Now let's talk about an exiting technique that's a little bit more advanced. Down here, for instance, you see how you did kind of a double bottom right in here, reversing around the pivot, like such. Now, I kept my stop fairly loose. If you recall, my stop was somewhere up in here, so I gave it lots of wiggle room. Wiggle room meaning room to allow the market to move freely as it continues perhaps in a downward move. But a more some of you exited down here. I saw from the log, the question log, you were typing in that you were already out of this trade because, in fact, you did have a reversal here, and you also had a reversal here. A tight stop on that trade would have been down somewhere in this area right in here. See this area right here? See how you're getting a reversal? Well, there's a couple of techniques. You can put a buy to cover order just a tick or two either above or below the pivot. Above or below the pivot, like such. Like here or here. Like I had on the dollar over there, remember? Like here or here. And you know, you would have gotten out and you would have saved this drawdown on this trade that took you all the way back up into here. When we talk about drawdown, drawdown is the amount of money you give back at the end of a trade when it's reversing against you. So you were short from here, right? You were short from here, came down, hit the pivot, bounced, did a reversal. You could have gotten out here. And if you didn't get out there, you could have waited for this bounce and then gotten out somewhere over here. Tighter stops. Does everybody see that, by the way? Does that make sense? Had a similar move on YM. Does that make sense? So just different exiting techniques. That's all that is, different exiting techniques. Here we had divergence on YM. If you recall, YM was going the other direction at the open. Here's 631. The market opened right here. 631 was right there. 630, 631. So YM, in fact, was divergent from the other markets in the fact that it had actually broken this pivot. We put this line in here because we were not certain if, in fact, we were in the midst of a trend change. That's what happens sometimes around the open in these markets and the equities. You know, sometimes the direction is not clear. YM was clearly divergent and had broken up in here. Now, when it rolled and took out this pivot, we shorted YM. I'm not certain exactly where we got filled. I want to say it was either somewhere in here or possibly it was somewhere down here. I can't remember. But either way, let's say it was down here. We held the trade. We felt a little bit of heat. We were into good. Felt a little bit of heat. Pulled back. We had a nice loose stop. Stop was up here above the pivot. Right? Never took us out. Came down, hit another pivot, and then with a tight stop, you could have exited the trade down in here. Now, NASDAQ, on the other hand, NASDAQ is dancing to its own drummer over here. You had a couple of shorting possibilities on NASI, if you recall. After the open, here's 632, so the market opened right about here. Somewhere right about there, 630, 631, 632. Had a little bit of a short. Had some data problems early. Remember, we had to reboot. This was actually a little short that came in, would have stopped you out, came, hit this pivot, broke, hit the next pivot. This was a nice little short trade here. Came, we got some chop, and then we never did retrade NASDAQ. We didn't retrade NASDAQ because of the divergence and the chop here around this pivot. So, you know, you can make the case you had two trades on NASDAQ. You had the initial short out of the open. You had another trade, might have stopped out, and then you had this final little bip down through the pivot. Not much action on NASI. That's why we like to track and trade 2 or 3 different markets, including the currencies, 6E and the dollar. We feel it with you have a couple of 3 charts up, you're going to get some opportunity pop up somewhere, and you want to trade the market that's moving. Now, we got EMD and NASDAQ coming all the way back up. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Notice that YM is comparatively weak, staying underneath its pivot here, although it looks like it wants to break to the upside. It's almost looking like a little V-shaped bottom here. And you could have actually bought EMD on a break of this pivot to the upside. We didn't do it because we were done trading. We'd made our money and we were done. But that was a nice little break up there. Likewise with NASDAQ over here. Notice you took this little pivot area out right here, this resistance, which was 4/8, I think. Or no, 1/8, extreme, and broke up here. Now, if we're going to continue to the upside, what should happen is, if you're watching 6E, 6E should continue back up to 39. you should see the dollar break down like this if the equities are going to continue higher. And you would see EMD push up through. Well, it's doing it. There you go. You're getting it right now. There you go. Breaking to the upside. YM, EMD, coming through the pivots. NASDAQ, YM's trying to follow the party here a little bit. Part of what made me think that this was a little bit of a trend reversal happening here was this move, this break right here, right in here. See this little break right there? It's almost looking like a little bit of a head and shoulders reversal, kind of double bottom. And it's quite possible if you wanted to trade this to the long side, you could have put a buy order right somewhere in there. See, as you came up through the pivot, and your target, of course, would be the next pivot up, which would be right here. In fact, you're hitting it right now. If you traded the long side of that break, you're actually hitting it right now. Let's see what EMD's doing. NASDAQ's the strongest of the bunch. By the way, if you track NASDAQ, a good thing sometimes to keep an eye on is what Apple's doing. Apple is a big chunk of the NASDAQ market, of course. And I've been watching Apple. I keep an eye on Bloomberg and CNBC sometimes. You got the tickers that come up. Dow, sometimes I quote the Dow. Dow's down 24 and change. It was down as much as 50 at one point, so it's already retraced a big chunk of its sell-off from this morning. Keep an eye on Apple sometimes relative to what the NASDAQ is doing. Apple never really sold off much. It was only down, I think, 30 cents at one point, which explains some of the divergence with NASDAQ over here. Anyway, we had some good trades here today. Hope everybody